Dishonored 2 is more than just a worthy successor. Where the original established the world, tone, and concepts of the franchise, Dishonored 2 refines all of those things and explores them even further. It takes everything that made the original game so good and makes it better. Suffice it to say, Dishonored 2 is one of my favorite games of 2016. Hey guys, JV here sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly of Dishonored 2. Before we jump in, I just want to let you guys know what my experience was with the game, because I think that's important for my perspective and my biases. So first off, I played the game entirely on PC. I didn't try it on any other console. My playthrough clocked in at just under 12 hours. I tried to take my time and explore as much as possible, but there were definitely points where I was like, let's just get through this. I want to see what's going on with the story next. There were a ton of reports of technical issues with the PC version of the game. I didn't hear anything for either console, but I personally had very few technical issues. I have a fairly new rig, and so I had solid frame rates, no technical issues. I had one crash, but it was really inconsequential. It didn't really hurt me at all. The saving system is good enough to where I didn't lose any progress or anything like that, so I was largely unaffected by the issues some were having. So if you're expecting me to tell you about issues that are technical, I just didn't have any with the game. Let's start with the good, and I'm going to be honest with you guys, there's very little bad or ugly about this game for me. That's how much I liked it. So starting off with the good here, we're going to talk about gameplay first, and the non-linear level design was fantastic in this game. You just have so many choices on which direction you want to go, and as a result, the levels feel really open and explorable. They're really huge playable spaces that Arkane was able to create for this game. And as a result, things felt really wide open, almost like an open world, but again, it's not. So there is a defined space, but it's just so big and so rich that it feels that open. And so that was really remarkable. I was really impressed by that. And I was also impressed by how much was in each level and each world. It didn't feel like there was any wasted space. There's so much attention to detail, so many things to do, so many mini puzzles and tasks within each mission, conversations that you wanted to listen to because they were relevant to the story or what you were doing. There was a great incentive to explore every nook and cranny by searching for the runes and bone charms. So that's what I did throughout my playthrough. I spent a lot of time just searching for runes and bone charms because that would inevitably lead me to something that was really interesting. I also really enjoyed the set pieces in a lot of these levels. In about half of the levels, there was one big giant set piece that blew me away. For example, the clockwork mansion and the concept of having to, pull these levers to change the level itself was so novel and fantastic and unique. It really blew me away. I spent a lot of time in that level just pulling levers and seeing what was going on in that level. I really liked the Dust District as well. It felt very different in terms of the pacing and the order of the missions. It felt very different. It was almost like a departure from what I had played before, but it was really wide open and there were so many avenues to explore. And so the Dust District was really fantastic in my opinion. Aramis Stilton's mansion, that was a fantastic level where you had the little timepiece, which was a great mechanic where you could just go through time. You could use that to kind of play around with the stealth mechanics. One thing I didn't like with that level, I will say real quick, is that they took away your powers. I think that was kind of a change of pace decision maybe. I'm not really sure on that. I didn't like not having my powers though. It felt like I was stripped away of something I had before. But again, it made me, traverse the level in a different way, and that's something I definitely appreciated as well. So overall, the level design, the set pieces, just everything you could do within these missions made me want to explore. It made me want to take my time with games, and I'm a very impatient gamer. I really just want to get through the story. There's a lot of fluff in video games lately that I don't appreciate. That is the exact opposite. Dishonored 2 actually rewired the way that I play just through the amazing amount of things I could do in the world that I was interested in. It made me interested. It made me hooked. And so this game, the level design just hooked me, and that really blew me away. Shifting gears now towards combat, and this is without a doubt a very strong stealth action game. When you put this against other games, I guess recently Thief is a big example, but Dishonored 2 and Dishonored in general really reminds me of BioShock as well. Even though BioShock doesn't really have that stealth mechanic, it's kind of like a fusion of both in my eyes. And so the stealth action combat in this game is very strong. I mean, all the abilities, whether you're Corvo or Emily, they push you towards stealth, but also you have an amazing amount of options to be very non-stealthy. You can just go in guns blazing, and this game really blows it out of the water in terms of that. There is so much to do in terms of being very deadly and killing absolutely everything. And so there's a strong variety in how you can play through every single level, every single situation. And a lot of that comes through the amount of abilities that each character has. And of course, Corvo and Emily have a different ability set entirely. They don't have the same abilities. Some of them serve similar purposes, but that allows variety as well. And so within that, you're using these abilities, but you also have a variety of tools at your disposal that you can kind of hotkey to each hand. So you have these two hands, you can choose between an ability and some kind of item, and you can switch between these. And so there's so many different scenarios and ways that you can encounter almost every single situation. That's kind of at the heart and soul of the gameplay and combat in this game. So there's a variety of tools. You got these crossbows, all these different bolts that do different things, traps, and then you can go ahead and upgrade all of those things. Not to mention you can also upgrade all of your abilities to do different things that open up new avenues and ways to explore the world and, again, engage in combat. Something that I genuinely appreciated, and I think I noticed this because Harvey Smith pointed it out in one of the promotional videos for the game, was that Emily's abilities are thematically relevant to her as an empress. And when you think about it, that idea is translated across this game. It's absolutely insane. I know we're kind of getting away from combat, but everything in this game is cohesive. It's tied together, it's relevant, and it makes sense within this established universe. And sometimes you get this disjointed feeling with different concepts in games like, oh, that doesn't seem like it's in place, that doesn't seem like it works. There's very little in Dishonored 2 that suffers from that disjointed feeling. Everything is cohesive and it works and it makes sense. So to wrap up my thoughts on combat, I love the hell out of it. I think it's very strong for a stealth action game, and I need to play through the game a second time. I've only got one playthrough again with Emily, and it was low chaos, and so I was very stealthy, killed the least amount of people as possible, and even tried to go undetected most of the time, just knocking out most of my opponents. And so the ability to knock people out or kill them, low chaos, high chaos, all of that tied together is just so fantastic for the combat in this game. And that brings us to player choice within the gameplay. And we've already talked about the nonlinear paths in each level. We've got that, but we've also got this nonlinear gameplay, which really allows you to choose how you want to play the game. And so you have choices between killing and sparing targets, but also enemies in general. You can go through the entire game without being detected once. You can go through the entire game without killing anybody at all. And so you have those choices. And for me as a gamer, I value player choice big time. And so the fact that I was able to make those decisions, I really just appreciated that from this game. And again, we had the chaos system returning from Dishonored, where you have player consequence and decisions. So you're making these choices, so it's great. You know, you have the ability to make these choices, that's great. But what's even better is you have these consequences, and you have these very important decisions that impact the very end of the game, where you get an epilogue and some guy tells you, hey, this is what you did in the world, and this is how it affected the future. Again, I'm a huge fan of karma and morality systems in games, and so Dishonored 2 really pulls it off, really just draws from what was great about the system in the original game and continues that trend. It's really good. Player consequence, player decision, those are all things that I care about, and so I really enjoyed them in this game. There's also a third layer of choice that I picked on while I was playing through the game, and that's that Dishonored 2 allows you to rush through or just focus on the targets and the task at hand. You can just go straight through the game in a very linear path if you want to, or you can take your time. And so maybe this kind of ties into the level design as well, but Dishonored 2 for the first time can be, I think, a 7 or 8 hour run through or playthrough. Keep in mind, mine was 12 hours. Or you can take your absolute time and stretch this thing out to 16 hours. If you want to go everywhere, read all the books, see everything that the levels have, to offer, then you can absolutely do that if you want to. That's just another element of player choice that I appreciated from the game. Just a few more side notes on gameplay in general. There is a ton of replay value with Dishonored 2. If this is a value purchase for you and you're thinking, am I getting enough out of this game even if I don't like it or not? Can I play it enough times? Can I put enough hours into it? There is very high replay value in my opinion, in my view, for this game. You have the choice between Corvo and Emily at the very beginning, and then you have those chaos choices as well, whether you want to kill everyone or spare everyone, whether you don't want to be detected at all. I mean, you can start counting them on your fingers. There's a lot of ways you can play through this game, and so if you're invested into it, there is a lot of replay value here. Another feature from the original game is the post-mission screen, which details a lot of things that you want to keep track of. And I think this is just great for people who like to 100% games or like to go achievement hunting. You can track everything that you want to collect, and that's something that I just appreciate. Again, I just appreciate a lot about this game. And so there's a post-mission screen after every single mission detailing the collectibles you got, the stats you had, how many people you killed, how many times you were detected, all of that, so you can keep track and really be informed of the playthrough that you're choosing. Again, this promotes the replay value of the game. One final note, I love the quick save and quick load functions in the game, especially for stealth, because anytime I was detected by a ton of enemies, I would just quick load. That's just the way I played the game, because I wanted to get the low chaos ending for Emily, and I didn't want to kill a lot of people. So if I made a big mistake, then I wanted to roll back. And as a result, I quick saved very often, and so I didn't have to pause, I didn't have to click save game, and I didn't have to deal with all of that. And so it really just kept me in the game, kept me engaged, and that's just a small thing that I appreciated as well. Now let's talk about story, and just from a design standpoint, I think Dishonored 2 succeeds in two ways. Number one, it carries over well as a sequel. If you played the first game, then you're going to appreciate a lot of what this story has to offer. There's returning characters, callbacks, and references, so you will appreciate that. And number two, it's easy to pick up without playing the first game. Everything that you need to know is explained. There's no huge holes or anything that you feel you might be left out on. Maybe I have a biased, perspective because I did play the first game, and so I do know a lot of that, but it seemed to me the way that the game was designed and how there's so much to learn out in the world, so much to pick up and read, that you can easily pick up the franchise and start playing without playing the first game. A big improvement that I really appreciated compared to the previous game is the watercolor cinematics, the narrations between each mission that gets you some insight into what Emily's thinking or what Corvo's thinking, again, depending on your decision. That also impacts what you're hearing in these scenes. And so I really appreciated that extra perspective into my character. I suppose it's important to point out that we didn't have a voice protagonist in the original game, and that's a departure. In this game, both of the protagonists are voiced, and so I think that was a solid decision for the story. And again, it allowed for these narrations in between missions that give you, some context into how the character is feeling, what's their mindset, and how they're, going to approach the mission they're about to go into. And so I thought that was a great kind of thing to wrap together the story. Dishonored 2 has some really good characters, and they fit fantastically well in the story. Again, everything is cohesive about Dishonored 2, but these characters, I really fell in love with them. Kieran, Jindosh, Overseer Byrne versus Paolo, and that whole conflict in the Dust District. Again, Aramis, Stilton. I think Dust District was actually one of the strongest missions in the game just overall, but all of these characters were interesting to me. None of them were exceedingly boring. I think actually the weakest character in the game might be Delilah, because she's very transparent. She's, very one-sided. You kind of understand where she's coming from very quickly. At least that's my perspective. And so tons of interesting characters that I cared about. And I think I owe a lot of that, the reason that I care for all these characters, to the established lore and story of this world, of this franchise, of this universe, this creative IP that Arkane Studios has with Dishonored. It is very deep and complex, and everything is fleshed out and explained for the most part. You've got this duality between the void, which is kind of this alternate reality space where you get to visit the outsider, talk to him, but at the same time you're in reality and you're dealing with those consequences. And there's just so much fleshed out about the world. It's so interesting. And what's great is that the game gives you an avenue to learn more about it. And that's through all the books, all the documents, all the current events, all the notes that you can read written from one NPC character to another, letting you in on their opinions and whatnot. This is a very realized world, and that's what I love about it. I could go on with a ton of specific examples, like the technology, how and why it's there, the political climate of the world. All of it is there, and the game gives you an opportunity to learn more about it. And again, this is one of those moments where I realized I usually don't do this in video games, but Dishonored 2 is just so damn good that I want to read more about the world. I want to take a moment to read this book, figure out what's going on, and then I get this better picture of what's going on in the overall grand scheme of things within this IP. I fell in love with the world of this game. I also fell in love with the art, design, direction, and overall aesthetic of this game. From a graphical perspective, it's very pretty to look at. It's not trying to be realistic because there's a very specific style they're going for, very specific creative aesthetic with steampunk. That's what we had with the original game. That carries over with Dishonored 2. Of course, we have a different flavor with Karnaca. I mean, the architecture and design of Karnaca is very different from Dunwall. It's a stark contrast. Things are more rounded. They look more foreign almost, obviously foreign compared to Dunwall, and they just did a really good job of distinguishing the game. This is not just a carbon copy of Dunwall. Karnaca is its own beast entirely, and that's felt throughout the characters, throughout everything that we've already talked about in this video. And just a side note here, the long distance views of Karnaca, usually you've got this skybox with kind of this flat wall where you're looking at it, you're like, hey, that doesn't look super realistic, this is just a placeholder. They did a great job with the long distance views of Karnaca from the Dreadful Whale. The skylines, there's some fantastic views when you're up in Kiran Jindosh's mansion, just beautiful, breathtaking moments. The attention to detail with every single room that you can explore, again in these non-linear levels, there's so much to explore, and it's not just the volume that's impressive. It's the detail within that volume. There's no wasted space. Every single apartment belongs to somebody. You can believe that someone lives there because there's food everywhere. There's a bed, maybe it's made, maybe it's not. There's notes. There's, things that are stored in the cabinets and the cupboards. It feels like a real place. And they've just filled these entire worlds with so many stories, and the attention to detail blows me away. The character models are another layer of this attention to detail. They're very intricate. Each different character is very distinct, and you kind of have this art style that they went with of the original Dishonored, where some of the men are very bulky and stocky and their heads are almost square-like. They've got these huge noses, tons of wrinkles, and tons of different details. And so I can really appreciate the creativity that they took with that direction. Not to mention, we've got this additional layer outside of when you're actually playing the game, also when you're playing the game with the UI, I guess you could say, but we've got this distinct art style with the text and the symbols and the menu, the mismatched fonts, which are really interesting. At first I was like, that doesn't seem right. Why is it like this? But then I start to understand this is just the aesthetic of the game. And this is something that I preach a lot about that I love with Overwatch. There's just a fantastic aesthetic with that game, just with the presentation and style, the way that this game is presented through the text, the symbols, and the menu and all of that stuff. It's got its own unique and distinct style. That's something that I also really appreciate. Sound is something that I usually don't pay a lot of attention to or I overlook in video games, but Dishonored 2 has some great sound. Some specific moments that I have in mind are the wind coming through in intervals, like every 5 minutes in the Dust District. I thought that was a very powerful kind of concept. I guess that goes along with the gameplay as well. But the sound of that wind, almost this panic as the dust just blows through these windbreakers, I thought it was a very, very cool kind of element there. I also really like the enemy sound design with the blood flies. The sound, that buzzing sound was just blood curdling for me. Also the nest keepers, those zombie-like creatures that remind me of, I believe, the Weepers or the Whalers. I can't remember what they were called in Dunwall in Dishonored, the original game. But overall, the enemy sound design, some elemental sound, effects were very effective. At the same time, I love the main theme. All of the ambient music was very pleasant, nice to listen to. I would also run into certain NPC characters, civilians mostly, out in the world, singing or dancing or putting on some kind of performance. And so I would find myself stopping and listening to them. And so that's something, again, that I just normally wouldn't do in a game. So I have to point it out to you guys because that is just, it broke my habits because it was that good. So I just talked at length about how much I love the game. All of those things I just talked about were the good of Dishonored 2 for me. So now let's talk about the bad. And I'll give you a little hint. There's no ugly for me in Dishonored 2. So there's no section after bad. I just really love the game and I didn't have any technical issues, which would have been ugly. But there's nothing ugly about this game in my opinion. So let's talk about bad. And this is something that I noticed throughout the game and especially towards the end of the game because I was thinking, why wasn't this here? And that's that there's no interaction with Corvo or Emily after your decision between the two in the very beginning of the game. Again, you choose between playing as Corvo or Emily, and then the other one gets frozen in stone. And so I felt, as much as the developers spent a lot of time and care on this world, I felt that that was a lazy choice to just take that character out of the game completely. Maybe it was a sacrifice to put more focus on the character that you chose, but I would have liked to have interacted with Corvo or Emily the choice that I didn't make as an NPC character. I would have really appreciated that. Instead, I chose Emily, and I was just really focused on Emily, right? But I didn't have any interaction with Corvo. So if I am someone who played the original Dishonored game, I didn't get anything from Corvo there because he wasn't a voiced protagonist. I wanted to learn more about Corvo in my Emily playthrough, but I couldn't because he was frozen in stone. He was just taken out of the game. So I really would have liked to have, interacted with the character that I did not choose. I bragged a lot about exploration and the nonlinear path and being able to choose if you want to go from point A to point B, or just having this complete player freedom. That's something, again, I bragged about for this game. But at the same time, I got tired of searching for runes and bone charms. And the sequence of events that led me to wanting to explore is going after those runes and bone charms. And the problem with that is that, that concept of going and searching for those things is inherently, it's like busy work. And so the process of finding interesting things to do was to go search for the bone charm, and then you would find something interesting in the world. And I don't know if there's a solution for this, or if this was just a compromise that they made, but I would like that to switch. I would like to do interesting things in the world, be attracted by something that's going on in the world, and then find a bone charm, and then find a rune, instead of going out searching for a rune and then finding something interesting along the way. I feel like that's a little bit of a disconnect in the game, and I think that could be improved in a future game. With regards to the story, we saw a lot more of the outsider. We got a little more insight on who he is. We even got his origin, why he exists, and all that stuff. But still, overall, I feel that the outsider is just this cryptic figure. We don't know enough about him. There's a little more explanation, but not enough for me. And he was very cryptic in the first game with Dishonored. The original game really didn't explain enough, in my opinion. It was just kind of this cosmic figure over here that's super mysterious. Maybe that's on purpose, and that makes sense. But he's still this just ultra cosmic figure, and I wish I knew more about the outsider. Maybe that's something they're saving for the third game. I just feel like there could have been a little more explanation in this game. Something I mentioned before in terms of characters, I think Delilah was actually one of the weakest points in terms of interesting characters. You kind of got her backstory. I guess that was interesting. The circumstances were interesting, but she felt very flat as a character for me. And maybe that's because I didn't see enough of her. I wish I saw more of Delilah throughout the game. She took over in Dunwall, and then she just kind of sat there, and there were certain flashbacks where you saw her, but there was a lot of focus on the individual targets in the game. I felt like they dominated the main purpose of the game. It's like, instead of, oh, we need to work towards and kill Delilah, that's always, a long-term goal, right? But we're bouncing from target to target to target. Those become the main focuses. I lost sight of the main target. And so when I killed Delilah, I didn't get the satisfaction that I thought I would. And I think that's because of their decision to kind of, remove her a little bit while you're in Karnaca, let you do whatever you're doing there, and then come back to her in the very end. And so I think that was a deliberate design decision, but I personally wish that I saw more of Delilah throughout the game. My final critique is a very small one, but a lot of the time I was unsure whether I was in a safe space, not like a modern safe space, but whether I was in a neutral zone or not. And so I would just walk into a certain area, and this is the same thing that would go on with the original game. Maybe this is just a disconnect between me and the game, but I didn't know whether I was in a neutral zone or not. And this game does display on top, it says, hey, you're in a neutral zone or a hostile zone, but it's hard for me to identify. So I would skulk around in certain situations where I didn't need to, where I was completely safe, especially in the Dust District, which was a huge zone. But it seems like there was pockets of neutral zones, but pockets of, unsafe, hostile zones as well. And that confused me a lot of the time. So I wish that was a little more clear, maybe a constant HUD icon somewhere that's very small that let me know. That's something that would definitely help me out personally. And that is it for the bad section. Again, there's no ugly. I didn't have any technical issues, and nothing else outside of that struck me as ugly with Dishonored 2. And that just goes to show how much I really loved this game. I think it's, healthy to still point out some downsides and things that I didn't really like, even though I love the game, but there's just not much to complain about for me. So to summarize my overall feelings with Dishonored 2, I think it's a creative masterpiece. I think it's a top 3 game of 2016. I think it's a top 10 game of the past decade. That's how good I think Dishonored 2 is. That's how much I appreciate it. That's how much I admire the creativity of the team, Harvey Smith and Arkane Studios working with Bethesda. It's just a damn good game. It's really, really good, and I fully expect myself to return once I've, gotten through my ridiculous backlog of games I need to play before the end of the year. I fully expect to play as Corvo, play High Chaos, go back through this game and experience Karnaca again. But Dishonored 2 is an incredible game, and I think that if you are even remotely interested in first-person games and adventure games, action games, stealth, this is a fantastic experience. This is something you need to play. As always, I'd love to hear from you all in the comment section below. How did you feel about Dishonored 2 after playing the game? What is your review? What are some things you like, the good, the bad, the ugly, kind of in the same format that I did? Share all of your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, remember to hit that like button. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.